When a loving, cheerful, religious father of 10 kids decided to adopt 5 more, things weren't really going to go as smoothly as he had hoped. With the kids' original parents becoming more and more of a problem, he felt that he had no choice but to turn to the dark web to deal with this growing problem. This is the story of a very smart and well-put-together family called the Pences. However, as good as they had things and as smart as they seemed to be, they were actually fairly naive when it came to many other areas of life. This would definitely come back to bite them later, but for now let's start back at the beginning with who they are and how they met. Christopher Pence met his future wife, Michelle, when they were teenagers living near Seattle. It wasn't long before the two got married in 1999, when Christopher was 19 and Michelle was 20. In just 1 year, the couple came to have 2 twin girls together. They both continued to fire out babies fairly rapidly until they ended up with 4 kids, after which Christopher decided it was time to get a snip and had a vasectomy. Christopher's dream was to get a career working in the finance industry, hit it big, and live in a nice house in downtown Seattle. If Michelle ended up with her own well-paying job, it would be even easier, they thought. He got a stockbroker's license and got several rental properties.
So I had some fairly outrageous dreams about my future while in school. I was convinced that once I was finally able to get out of school, that I would work as one of the top investment bankers on Wall Street, own several skyscrapers in downtown Seattle, that would be leased out, and own a nice penthouse in the city where my wife and myself and maybe 1 or 2 children would live. God has a sense of humor.
With this grind, though, he was very unhappy. Christopher started to fall into a bit of a personal crisis. He had always been raised in religion, but he hadn't been taking it too seriously. Now he had some big questions about life that he felt he couldn't answer on his own. This sent him back to religion to search for answers, which brought a huge change to both he and his family's lives.
At various points along this path, God changed my thinking about how a man is to be the leader of his family, and how children are actually blessings and rewards.
Christopher started focusing much less on his career and more on church, feeling that he must have some sort of higher calling. In a speech at his church, he said, "There are many biblical examples about how our dreams may not be what God wants for us. Job did not want his children to die, or his storehouses to be destroyed, or his health to be impaired, but God's perfect will allowed this to happen. Jeremiah wanted to marry a nice girl and have a family, but instead God used him as a prophet of death." Christopher, feeling that he had gone against his calling, went back to the clinic and got his vasectomy reversed not too long after getting it done in the first place. Michelle was raised very much the same way as Chris and was more than ready to get back into the swing of things herself. She started reading books on what it meant to be a woman and came to her own conclusions. She said, "I entered marriage thinking of it as an equal partnership, knowing but not understanding what it meant that my husband is my head. I had no idea of the importance of my role as a mother and the significance God placed on motherhood. I had no idea that God called barrenness a curse and children the greatest blessing he can bestow. I had no idea that God said so much about children in the Bible. They are heritage, a reward." And boy oh boy, they practiced what they preached. By 2017, Chris and Michelle had 10 children in total. This was in addition to a few failed pregnancies, 1 child who didn't make it, and many more attempts. The family started to need more space, a lot of it, so they moved out to live with Chris's parents in a rural area about 25 miles north of Seattle. They turned the home into somewhat of a self-sufficient little area with cows, chickens, beehives, and a lot of vegetables. There were so many people in this family that they had to go to church on Sunday in a bus. The doctors actually advised Michelle to stop having kids, but she really scoffed at the idea. One of her children was born with cerebral palsy, which caused a social worker to wonder if she really had the time or the ability to homeschool children with such a condition. But even so, she wanted to raise the kids entirely herself in order to focus in on their studies from a more Christian lens. She felt that she couldn't have done any better than Chris, calling him the handsome man that makes it all happen, saying that he was a perfect example of a man who loved his wife just as he was supposed to. By now, he was working at Microsoft, making quite a bit of money and allowing his family to live as they wanted. Chris really did seem to be a harmless guy. He had no criminal record whatsoever and was never known to be violent. The guy would come home from work and listen to Christian rock while helping his wife out with the kids. They invited people from church over to their house on Sunday afternoons, and nobody ever suspected anything could be going on behind the scenes. For now, nothing was. But things would all change when the family decided that they wanted some more kids. One day, Chris and Michelle would decide that adoption was going to be their next challenge. However, they didn't really know the best way to go about it. They started working with more traditional adoption agencies, went through hours and hours of training, took psychological evaluations, and talked to numerous social workers. The problem was, the two wanted to adopt 5 children. Given the already massive size of their family, there weren't any agencies that were willing to go along with that. So after about 2 more years of having no luck, they simply placed an ad online in a homeschooling-related forum that Michelle frequented. The ad read as, "We would like to adopt a child who is less than 11 years old. We are open to boys or girls. We feel we can accommodate a sibling group of up to 5 kids. Almost any ethnic background will blend in with our family. We are open to children with many special needs. We do not mind having contact with the child's biological parents, by email or by phone or by mail or in person, provided the parent was/is not abusive to the child." This ad caught the attention of a woman named Christina Cordero, who was facing some problems in her own house. She had come to learn that her husband was propositioning other women and felt that her kids were no longer safe around him. The husband himself had told the police that his sexual behavior was a continuous struggle with his family, having been caught with child material and even showing that material to other children. Their family had downsized from a home down to an RV. The oldest child was developmentally disabled and they couldn't find a place to live. She came to Chris and said, frankly, that her kids were not safe with her and they needed somewhere to go. By coincidence, Chris and Michelle were actually on a 6-week cross-country trip after Michelle once again gave birth and Chris was allowed to go on paternity leave. The two were in a motorhome, crossing through Massachusetts when getting the message from Christina, who was living in a place called Hoosick Falls, not all too far away. Michelle felt that this might have been their calling, as she herself came from a broken family with an absent father. So they drove out to Hoosick Falls and decided to pray with the family. Chris and Michelle took some time to deliberate on the whole thing, promising to come back later. And that they did. In just a few days, they turned around on their trip and came back, deciding to go through with the whole arrangement. After a few months, they nailed down a deal. Christina would keep her child with special needs, while all of the other 5 would go on to become adopted by the Pences. They took all of the new kids into their RV and headed home. Christopher later said himself, "We got to Massachusetts with 10 children and left there with 15. Immediately, not all was well. They actually hadn't legally adopted the kids. While Christopher liked to think of these 5 kids, aged 1 to 9, as his new kids, they weren't going to take to him so easily. When asked by someone if they were all one big family, one of the Pence daughters excitedly said yes, while one of the newly adopted kids said, "No, there's 10 of them and 5 of us, and they took us from our parents in Massachusetts." Michelle wrote online about how hard the newfound disharmony in her home was and spoke of what she called meltdowns of epic proportions. She said, "Never have we seen anyone give an eye roll before this experience, not to mention the screeching, yelling, and whining that accompanies all of the above." Now that their family had gotten even bigger, they had to move all over again, this time heading south to Hawkins, Texas. They bought a house for $329,000 in June of 2019, making this their new home base. During this time, the family was actually under investigation, with at least 2 welfare checks being done on the unhappy adopted children. Eventually, the family was told that the DCF would be taking custody of the adopted children and bringing them back to Massachusetts, where they would likely go into foster care. So, both the Pences and Christina decided to make the adoption permanent, the right way on paper. Christopher, Michelle, and all 15 of the kids were photographed smiling together behind a court bench. Christina and her husband came out to visit the kids 3 times, one of those times being at the Texas home. They then decided to move out to Texas as well. However, Christopher and Michelle weren't really comfortable with this. After all, they had adopted the kids. They felt that Christina was simply using them to hide her kids from the Massachusetts child welfare system and have their ways paid. Christina and her husband even asked if they could park their RV on the Pence's property, which they refused. This made dealing with the new kids more difficult as well, with at least one of them very excited that their parents were going to be living nearby. The Pences said, This was a little challenging to work through, that no, even though your birth parents are in Texas, they can't come over anytime they like to, because we need to maintain structure and order to family life. To add insult to injury, Christina got pregnant again after having just given up the 5 kids for adoption. This hurt the older kids who understood it better, the most in particular. The Pences were already fed up and ready to leave Texas. Not only because of Christina, but because they just didn't like the land. So they found a place in Utah that they purchased for $659,000 in November of 2020. This time they didn't share their new address with Christina, instead giving her a P.O. box to send mail to. When arriving to their new church, Chris opened up to their new pastor about their problems, saying that Christina and her husband were really causing problems for the kids. One of the adopted kids had even come back from meeting with their original parents with bruises from being held down too roughly. This pastor then introduced Christopher to his attorney. The whole ongoing dispute between the two families only continued to escalate. Christina now wanted to regain custody of her kids after having already signed them away, even reporting the Pences to the local CPS. She said that she didn't agree with how he was raising the kids or their lifestyle, which wasn't really a CPS-worthy complaint and wasn't taken seriously in the end. Either way, the Pences were unhappy, with Christopher being particularly offended. The whole legal route wasn't working for Christopher any longer. While reading about Edward Snowden, he first heard about the dark web when learning about how he had hidden his activity from the NSA. Christopher began to learn more and more about the dark web, although he wasn't really learning about it from the most reputable of sources. Despite being good with computers and seemingly pretty intelligent, Christopher was oddly naive. Dark web hitmen have become a fairly common urban legend over the years. It's said that you can buy anything on the dark web, anything from drugs to weaponry to murder for hire. While there's plenty of evidence for the first two being true, there isn't much evidence that the hitmen have ever been real. More often than not, by attempting to hire one, you're either handing your information over to the FBI to be arrested, or paying money to a con man who will never carry out your request. Christopher hadn't really thought of this, assuming that the services were real. Christopher opened up his dark web browser and came across a search engine. There he started searching for assassins, eventually coming across a website called the Sinaloa Cartel Marketplace. This was a website that claimed to have been owned by the Mexican Mafia and promised the services of reputable, safe, and powerful gang members. They assured viewers that they didn't require any identifiable info from their users, only a payment. Christopher decided to hit them up, creating a username consisting of only letters and numbers. He jovially messaged the website, saying, "Good day, admin. I have a couple targets, husband and wife, that I am needing removed. However, it is known that they and I don't quite see eye to eye on something. I am a couple days away from submitting the job as an accident. But before I do, I was wondering, in your experience, even if it is an obvious accident, what kind of investigation will be run against me, knowing that we are not on the best of terms?" Across the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere in a small village in Romania, a couple of scammers received Christopher's message and saw dollar signs in their eyes. They were very happy to answer his questions and hopefully take his money. Chris, seeing that it was all a bit pricey, asked if he could get a discount as his two targets lived at the same address. He then questioned if they could keep the children in the house safe, saying, "I am really trying to avoid them from being hurt. I'm wondering if a mugging gone wrong might be an option. Or maybe you have another suggestion. One of the children is 13 or so, but slow, so maybe his testimony could help avoid scrutiny/investigation." Christopher, seemingly satisfied with the answers he received, began transferring money into a Bitcoin wallet, and after some thinking, ordered a hit on Christina and her husband. He entered their address into the website, showing photos of the couple that they had taken from a baby book. In the end, he paid $16,000 for the hit on the couple. A few days later, Christopher tried to cancel the hit and get his money back, but then once again decided to proceed after all. The Romanian scammers never intended to follow up on this. After all, they already got their money, so they were happy. They had been scamming people like this for years and years and never actually followed up on any of the hits. I mean, after all, why would they? They already got the money. In the end, what was Christopher really going to do? Complain to the police that his illegal hired assassins had failed to kill their target? They really felt that they were pretty much in the clear on this one. After a while, this dark web website had its information leaked by a British hacker. This hacker, a man named Chris Monteiro, would often take the information from these websites and send them to different governments and authorities. One of these leaks was none other than the information provided by Christopher Pence. It wasn't long before this tip hit the FBI back in the United States, who paid a visit to Christina, saying that someone was attempting to kill her. She was in disbelief. On October 27th of 2021, Christopher Pence woke up at 6 a.m. as usual. He went through the house, waking up his children and preparing them for Bible study. Soon after, there was a loud bang on the front door as the entire home was flooded by lights from police vehicles. 16 different armed feds showed up to the home as agents split up to search the entire property. Christopher opened the front door to a riot shield in his face and a dozen officers holding assault rifles. It seemed that Christopher really didn't understand why the FBI had just brought hell down upon his home. He agreed to go out to speak to the lead agent in a car parked in the driveway. As a recorder was flipped on, Chris opened with, "I'd love to know what's going on." Chris was grilled about his life, his job, his marriage, his home, everything to get him comfortable and conversational. Christopher was more than happy to talk about the adoption, asking if they wanted the long story or the short version. They asked for the long one, after which Christopher told them the whole story. He then happily handed over his phones, tablets, computers, and all of his passwords. However, even if he had already covered his tracks, the FBI already had a mountain of evidence against him. They looked at him and asked him, "What got you to the point where you felt like you needed to have them killed?" Christopher started to cry and responded with, "On more than one occasion, the children have been abused, through discipline through the birth parents." As Christopher tried not to sob, the agent asked him, "And you decide that you just can't stand by any longer?" To which he responded, "Yeah." The agents, acting as if they understood in order to facilitate an easy conversation, told him, "So we know that you were on the Murder for Hire website, okay? I understand why, after talking to you." Satisfied that they had gotten their confession, the FBI was all set to leave. Even still, Christopher told them, "Thank you for doing what you're doing," being oddly polite given the situation. Christopher then looked at the agents and asked, "Have I ruined my life?" They then simply arrested him. When asked if he wanted anything from the home to take with him, he said, "I'd like a time machine if you have it." It goes without saying that the community was pretty shocked at Christopher's arrest and the allegations against him. Shortly after it all went down, Christopher's sister, April, set up a GoFundMe page for Michelle, hoping to pay for the inevitable upcoming expenses. She described the family as happy and loving, saying that, "Christopher has always been the solid provider. My sister-in-law does not work as she homeschools their kids." She admitted that what had been done was a terrible crime, but said that it didn't involve any harm towards his children, his wife, and didn't involve any infidelity. She ended by saying, "The hard part is they have no money to pay the mortgage, to buy food, utilities, put gas in the car, etc. They will most likely lose their family home." It wasn't too long before the GoFundMe page was taken down. Christopher's day in court was slowly coming up as the FBI investigated the case. Since Christopher's arrest, Michelle cut all contact with Christina abruptly and permanently. The only time Christina would see the kids after that was sitting with Michelle in court, supposedly supporting the man who had attempted to have her killed. The judge, David Hurd, said that he was a little bit disturbed by how this case had played out in comparison to other murder-for-hire schemes he had seen. He said, "Each one involved a defendant who was a longtime criminal, who had a bad record, and it was not particularly surprising that he or she would hire somebody to kill others. This case is different. It's a very difficult case." Christopher decided to just go ahead and plead guilty. He admitted that, from July to August of 2021, he had used his home computer to access the dark web and attempted to arrange a contract killing. He admitted that he paid $16,000 in Bitcoin to kill both Christina and her husband at their home in Hoosick Falls. He gave all of the details about providing their pictures as well as how he requested the murder to be carried out. Christopher has remained in custody ever since his arrest, waiting to hear his inevitable sentencing. He feared that it was going to be pretty heavy, but there's no doubt he hoped to lower it as much as he could. Christina has said that she wants to rebuild her bond with her kids and, if she can, fix things with Michelle. She told the media, "We're trying to restore relationships. His wife has been willing to talk to my mom, so it's a step in the right direction." While she refused to tell the media why she had given up her kids, she said that she did hope to see them again. She said, "It's a very sensitive situation. We have not had contact with our children for 2.5 years. So we are praying that the mother, who we don't believe was involved in the plot at all, would be willing to restore contact with us, but so far she's unwilling until he returns home. While Christopher sits in custody, Michelle has been caring for all of the kids herself. She's been, frankly, too busy to speak up with the media. Some of the older kids have found work at a small factory in town, hoping to help out with some expenses. What she has said on Facebook is, "For now, the plan is to continue homeschooling. For now, the plan is to keep things as stable as possible. For now, the plan is to take the next step in faith and accept the grace God gives us at each turn." Christopher Pence, now 43 years old, was sentenced in 2024 to 7 years in prison for what he did. If he gets time served and then further lowers the sentence with good behavior, he may be out within the next few years. It's speculated that his release will likely be in 2028. However, he is also ordered to serve 3 years of supervised release after his sentence ends. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Just recently, I've started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you like this channel, you might find that one interesting too. I've also opened up a merch store, so if you want to get your hands on some channel t-shirts, go ahead and check that out. Go ahead and follow me on social media if you feel like it, and I really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you can get all the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.